So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer, and I'm with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your technical support and one of your moderators for today. So today's slide and presentation for today is what employers need to know to best support youth with experience in foster care. And so we are excited for you to join us for this content today. Again, my name is Kirsten Bayer, and I'm with ICSPS. Yes, we know it is quite the mouthful of an acronym, but hopefully you are familiar with us. If you're not, we are housed in the EAF department in the College of Education at Illinois State University, and we provide professional support for the workforce system. And do professional development for them as well. So if you need anything during today's webinar, please feel free to email me, or you can use the chat or the Q&A to ask me any questions, and I will gladly support you. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Brittany Boston. She is the Associate Director for Equity and Outreach at our center, and she will be on to help me moderate today's session. And we are also joined by our Director, Amy Julian, as well, and she will be on just to kind of listen and pipe in if she needs to. So the first thing that we do on our Workforce Wednesday webinars is our beginning polls. So I'm going to launch both of those now. And if you're familiar with our Workforce Wednesday webinars, you're probably familiar with these polls. You should be able to take them now, and there's two of them. So the first one is where's your local area, and the second one is which partner do you best represent? And while you're taking those polls, I'm going to go over a couple housekeeping items. So this webinar is being recorded. It will be up on our Illinois Workforce Academy website. And it's also on Illinois WorkNet's website if you're more familiar with that. And the recording is usually up within about 48 hours. We do have to allow for time to edit closed captioning. Speaking of closed captioning, we do have that on for you today on today's session. So feel free to turn it on if you want to take notes, or if it just helps you follow along better, or if you need it for accessibility reasons, please feel free to do that. Tomorrow, you will receive a follow-up email where the recording will be, a link to the recording and the presentation will be in that email, as well as a follow-up survey. So you'll have everything in your email tomorrow. Again, the recording might not be up quite yet, but we will get it up within that 48-hour working hour time limit. And then today for your participation, so we are on Zoom webinar, so you do not have the ability to unmute yourself unless I do it. So I get to control it for you. So we will ask that if you have any comments or questions, or just want to say good morning or share a story with us, please participate in the chat or in the Q&A function. And then myself and Brittany will be monitoring that throughout our presenter's presentation today. And then when we have time where we break, or at the end of the session when we have that live Q&A option, if you would like to participate live, you can feel free to raise your hand, and then I can unmute you and you can ask the presenters live questions. Okay. And I think that's all I have for today. So the first poll, I'm going to go ahead and end those and share the results. We can debrief on them really quickly. The first poll, where's your local area? So most of you are from either up north or central Illinois, but we have a couple people from down south as well. So we have a good spread across the state. So thank you for joining us. And then which partner do you best represent? We have a lot of Title I and Title III people, and also other WIOA partners and stakeholders. So thank you for joining us and spending your morning with us. We really appreciate your time. We know that your time is valuable. So I'm going to stop sharing and let our presenter, Carrie, share her slide deck, and then I will hand it over to her and Michael. And myself and Brittany will be here the whole time. So if you need anything, please feel free to reach out to us via the chat.
Hello, it is so good to be here this morning, or it's morning there. It's about afternoon here. So thank you so much for having us. Let me just make sure that this is going to advance. My name is Carrie Ward, and I am Director of Fostering Success Michigan, which is a statewide initiative focused on post-secondary access and success for youth with experience in foster care. And Michael, if you want to briefly introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Michael D. Davis Thomas. I'm a foster care alumni and expert. I've done a lot of advocacy, public speaking, frontline work in the aspect of child welfare, and I'm excited to be here.
Thanks, Michael. And we can't see you. You have your screen Oh, there we go.
Oh.
Okay. So the results for today, after today, you'll have an understanding of how foster care may impact how an employee engages in your workplace. You'll have some ideas on how to best support employees with experience in foster care to reach their full potential. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can use an asset-based approach to support young people who are entering the workforce. So we just had that poll about who's in the room and why are you here and what you already know. But I would love to know a little bit about your knowledge of foster care. So Kirsten, if you can launch that poll by chance, that would be great. So how would you rate your knowledge level of the foster care system? Do you know what foster care is? So go ahead and feel free to complete the poll. And then you can also add comments in the chat if you'd like. We just kind of want to have a snapshot of what you already know. Shut that off and look in the, oh, I can't look in the chat. So
We can facilitate that for you, Carrie, if anybody posts in the chat.
okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let me know when you share the results so I can have an idea.
Perfect. Yeah, and I just put the link to the slide deck in the chat if anybody would like that as well. But nobody is participating in the chat yet.
Okay.
We'll give it just a couple more seconds for the poll. All right. So I'm going to share the results now, Carrie.
Okay. Ooh, familiar knowledge. I'm surprised by that and excited. Little to no knowledge, about 40% also. Okay, so that's good to know. So we'll walk you through lots of information today, including some basics about foster care, what it is, and how the experience of it might actually have an impact on employees. But I want to start with person first language. So you'll notice that when I talk about young people, I'll say a student with experience in foster care or a youth with experience in foster care, person with experience in foster care. Our young people provide expertise on the lived experience, and the experience itself is just one facet of their identity. So it's important to name that as like just a facet of who they are, as opposed to like a defining facet. So not saying youth from foster care or like foster youth. So my role is that I have a professional degree, but I'm a learner. And so Michael is actually the expert in the room. And so he's here to share his lived experiences with you. And we're really excited to talk about that. And so just a quick overview of what foster care is. Basically, it's a state-run program where young people are removed from their home because of abuse or neglect. And the ultimate goal is reunification. So like most of the young people who are removed do go back into parental care, and that's the goal, but some don't. So some may be placed with families or in residential facilities or with a foster care in a foster care home. But young people who age out of the system basically come of age 18 or so, and aren't actually reunified yet. So they might be in an independent living facility, but it's basically the idea of the state takes is the parent, so to speak, for a young person. As I mentioned before, so aging out of foster care is the idea of that young person reaching the age of adulthood while still in the foster care system. In Illinois, you have extended foster care until the age of 21, which basically means that young people can opt in to staying within that foster care system and continuing to receive that support, which is like casework support, but then also some financial support. And then but they are required to be working toward high school completion, post-secondary degree, or working. I want to pause and just talk a little bit about education outcomes for our young people, because that's a really important part when you're thinking about education, college, and then also employment. So in Illinois, the high school graduation rate for young people in the foster care system is 50%, compared to 80% in the general population. That's actually average. So nationally, it's about 50%. Michigan is about 40%. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is in a second. Post-secondary outcomes are equally challenging. So although about 84% of young people aspire to attend college, only about 20% get there, and only about 3 to 11% graduate without support. So there are campus-based support programs at certain like campuses in different states, and they are able to offer some supports, and we're seeing higher graduation rates there. But without that support, our students don't persist. To talk a little bit about why that education rate is so low, or the high school graduation rate is so low, we need to look a little bit deeper into the experience of foster care. So our child welfare systems are focused on safety and permanency, it's very important, but education is actually not the greatest priority. And so young people who have been involved in the foster care system often have frequent move from school to school. They can have like behavioral issues within school based on the fact that they're living in a really stressful situation, right? They're also like more likely to lose credits when they're transferring from school to school, and then also graduating late, so not necessarily on time. When you're thinking about the college system or vocational systems, they're often an unseen population, right? So you don't know if somebody's been in foster care, experienced time in foster care. And so college and vocational systems aren't necessarily set up to meet the needs of these young people. So if you think about like being removed from your home and being in a new school, being around new peers, that tends to equate to some coping mechanisms that are necessary for survival. But once they come of age, they still have kind of those coping mechanisms that might not work well for them in the world, right? So these are how systems are set up and actually don't support the needs of the young person. Our young people really need supportive adults to help them navigate college and career. We've done a pretty good job in Michigan addressing the college need, but I will say that like the content in this webinar is a bit new, right? So it's not something that like is often discussed, how employers can best support students. In fact, I did a lot of Googling beforehand, and I've only found like a handful of programs that are focused on addressing this need. So this is kind of a new conversation that I'm really excited to have with you. The important thing for you to keep in mind is that these young people have been involved in various systems, and they've needed to develop those coping mechanisms and really learn how to navigate those systems for survival. And we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. Challenges and obstacles for youth who have experienced care. So homelessness, food insecurity, mental health related to trauma, often like lack of social and network connections. So we'll talk a little bit deeper about that in a minute. Transportation is also a huge deal. So if you think about how you got your driver's license, right? Like we have to have like a parent or somebody that lets them drive the car around for X amount of hours before you can get your license. So there's that. And then also life skills gaps. So just thinking about how your family of origin might have taught you how to use a checkbook or problem solve when a car breaks down. Like those are all things that impact our young people. And then if you're thinking about like they're kind of on their own trying to navigate all this stuff, then also trying to work or go to school, those are huge impacts. I also want to mention the idea of family privilege. So that's what we call it in my field. It's the idea that people who grow up in families have benefits that are often invisible and unacknowledged that you get from being involved in a family system. The most important idea of this, I think, is the idea of failing safely, right? So if I lose my job, or if I am going to school and I don't pay my rent on time and I'm about to get evicted, people often have members of their family that they can go to for help. Our young people actually don't have those supportive adult networks. They're certainly on their own. So it really gives people who have been brought up in a family advantage over those who have not. Michael, do you want to add anything about the idea of family privilege? That one's a difficult one.
Yeah, you hit it right on the nose, like feeling safely, but also there's an aspect if, for instance, I was an individual who aged out, I had support, but also didn't. The last place that I aged out of was a pilot independent living program. So in that pilot independent living program, because I was the first case there, I was role modeled, and everybody would use the language as, well, Michael's going to be okay. He does, so I learned how not to ask for help when I really needed it, and that's a lot of the story for a lot of individuals, even if they're in that extended foster care place, like, they're like, well, I'm out of the system a little bit, so I don't want to, burden anybody, I don't want to feel or resemble weakness, so even if they know that there are resources, because the lack of people letting them know that it's okay to not be okay, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to fall, because that's how we grow and that's how we learn. A lot of them ended up being in domino effects, which I experienced. One thing went to another, got an eviction, ended up homeless, and throughout that whole experience until it got to, the brunt of it, I didn't ask for help. And then, I was in a situation where people were looking at me like, why didn't you come to us before? And it's just those internal feelings, and partly, being institutionalized.
Yeah, thank you. Those are all super important. And this touches a little bit on like what you mentioned. So thinking about like how like in a family system, your parents might have helped you get a bank account, balance your checkbook, get a driver's license. Having good credit is a huge family privilege. Buying and maintaining a vehicle, meal planning, food preparation. I remember I had one student who worked for me, and they texted me on an off day and they were like, am I supposed to refrigerate bagels or not? Like it's really like, I don't know. Asking for help. That's just what Michael was talking about. Communicating with those in authority. So our young people in care have had a lot of people who have made decisions for them on their behalf. And so there's a level of like wanting to be in control of their own lives. And it's really hard to ask for help when you don't actually want anybody involved in your business, right? And then there's that failing safely piece. So just kind of to pause and have you think for a moment, if you can identify any examples of family privilege that helped you get where you are today. So even just thinking about me and like, I went to school and then stopped out and went to school again and stopped out. And, it was really like my family who was there to support me, regardless of what I wanted to do, right? Like I had the privilege of having a safe home and a place to go when young people who have experienced foster care may not, especially those who have aged out of the system. So I wanted to give you that overview of like kind of what foster care is and what it's all about. And then I'll briefly tell you a little bit about my work. Michael will tell you about his, and then we'll get into the real questions. I'm really excited about that part. So Fostering Success Michigan is a statewide initiative focused on college access and success for youth with experience in foster care. The idea of FSM is really to create a pipeline of support in education for our young people. So my job is to bring together the 30 colleges that have on-campus supports for our young people, plus our Department of Education, plus our Department of Health and Human Services, so that people are connected and that everybody can talk and like share best practices. And then also so that like each individual doesn't have to be an expert in all things foster care, right? Like you have a network of experts that you can reach out to if you have questions about housing, if you have questions about food insecurity, if you have questions about any resources that our young people need. So FSM kind of brings all that together and is kind of the glue that holds all of the work together, so people aren't working in silos. I've been doing this work since about 2014. FSM started in 2012. And so we have an array of colleges, as I said, community colleges and four-year institutions that have campus support programs that support our students. And then we have a website, so I'll always call that out. Feel free to check out our website to learn more information, but know that my job is more focused on that post-secondary and college education piece. Again, this work with employers is new stuff. And so we'll talk a little bit about how that looks moving forward. Michael?
Awesome. Well, as you guys see, I own a LLC called MDDT Speaks that houses an array of things, and it really developed from me coming out of care, doing advocacy, sitting on panels and really talking and explaining my story. And I didn't have the greatest experience. I didn't have the best support and care, and I wanted to turn that into a positive by, sharing and helping the system, especially in my state, become better. So I've done a lot of consulting work, which MDDT Speaks house, consulting work for states, and just in a federal sense, I've worked with state and federal state representatives and senators and what have you of other states as well, and also have a podcast that is housed under MDDT Speaks. I have two seasons, preparing to do a third season. But I've hosted, Knighted, through the Children's Bureau, gave me permission to kind of, interview a couple other Knighted reviewers, along as myself being a Knighted reviewer, and kind of help promote that opportunity for youth, and to get that out there so everybody can understand the importance of that data collection, and the funding that comes from that data collection. And yeah, when I have to tell it, I'm drawing a blank, but I do a lot of different things, and a lot of it trickles down into really educating more people in the aspect of foster care and working with foster youth and alumni, and recognizing them as experts within this field, but also, I've worked with Carrie on numerous occasions on the educational side of things, and making sure that people who are in school, whether it be vocational, community college, a four-year university, or a certificate program, that they have the best support available, and that we can try our best to eliminate as many barriers as possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. And I want to brag on Michael for a second. So I've been in this field, like I said, since 2014, and I've maybe produced like 34 podcasts. I think it was about a year ago when Michael started MDDT Speaks, and the podcast Resilient Voices and Beyond. And Michael, you've done what? Like, how many podcasts have you done?
84,
Okay,
84, 83 altogether.
So, if you want to learn information about the foster care system, Michael has interviewed alumni of foster care. He's also interviewed professionals across the country for this podcast. And so, and he's done this all on his own through his own organization. So, you're going to learn a lot more about Michael related to employment in just a couple of minutes, but we just wanted to introduce ourselves and kind of like what our main gig is. Again, there's some links here too that we wanted to call out to you if you want more information about Michael's work, because it's
way off, actually.
88
episodes.
Okay, Okay, so now what we want, I'm super cool because I use the Back to the Future references. I'm aging myself. I know, I'm sure Michael's rolling his eyes, but I want to take you back to the past when you were just first starting to look for employment. And so thinking about like, what was your first job? My first job was in, again, aging myself, a video rental place, VHS, right? Okay. And I was 15 years old and I was terrible, like terrible. I was not good at customer service. Thinking about, did anyone help you get that job? How did you know how to go about finding a job? That's a really common question from our young people. Filling out job applications, preparing for interviews. So are all kinds of things that supportive adults often help young people with, or help young people learn how to do. Who helped you prepare for your first day of work, right? So like, did you know that you needed to pack a lunch? Did you know how to dress? Did you know to arrive 15 minutes early, right? All those things that are life skills that are may not necessarily equate to like general knowledge. Did you make a lot of mistakes? I made so many mistakes. At my first job, actually probably my first 5 jobs, I probably made a lot of mistakes and still make mistakes today. Was your supervisor demanding, supported, or supportive, or was your supervisor like exhausted? Didn't have time to deal with you? And what did you learn from this experience? So kind of like thinking about all of those things. A lot of times our first job is kind of a nightmare. Kind of humorous at the same time. But then when you think about a young person who's trying to build skills, and might not have that supportive network to tell them those answers, that first job might be really terrifying and really difficult. So put yourself in that position for a minute. And then also thinking about what kind of role models you had growing up related to work and career. So my mom always worked, my dad always worked. I knew that was like, there was normalcy in that, right? Career was valued in my house. It was assumed that I was going to go to college and that my brother was going to go to college. For young people with experience in foster care, sometimes people don't even talk to them about college or their future. So that's something, right? Was it assumed that you were going to graduate high school? Did anyone talk to you about what you might want to do, what you might want to be? And then once you name that, did anyone actually help you through those steps on how to get there? Our young people often don't experience those things, and they're kind of out there navigating it on their own, in addition to trying to pay the bills, the car payment, the rent, trying to deal with food insecurity and homelessness. So that's really, really hard. Once you got your first check, who helped you manage your money? Our young people often, as I mentioned before, have had people like making decisions for them on their behalf. And so when they get that first check, I mean, what do you want to do with that, right? I don't want to put it in the bank. I want to go out to eat. I want to buy myself some clothes. So those are all things that I want you to think about as a frame for the conversation that Michael and I are going to have now. So I'm going to actually stop screen sharing. And so when Michael and I were preparing for this webinar, I came up with some questions to ask, and we got like halfway through the questions and I was like, why are we not recording this? Because it was so good. And so I'm excited that it's being recorded and that we can talk about this today. So Michael, my first question for you is like, so in the past, you've had lots of different jobs. So when you first start working someplace, do you talk to them about your experience in foster care? Like, do you tell employers that?
So I want to be clear, like when I first started out, like looking for a job was in independent living. So like I was in an independent living home. And a lot of what my work schedule was tentative towards when staff could pick me up or when they couldn't. because the independent living home that I was in was in a rural area. So I got a job at Hollister, and I remember explaining to them like, hey, not going in grave detail. Hey, with my living situation, this, that, and the third. I didn't, really get into a place to sharing details or the sharing the language of being, hey, I'm a foster care alumni, or what have you, until I started to get into work closer to the child welfare. So I started working in residentials and juvenile detention where it was relative, but still I didn't want to share too much because I didn't want to look as such as a liability, or a conflict of interest.
Yes. So we talked about that a lot, like thinking about that liability thinking, and like you're there for work. So like you don't really, I mean, you're taught to show up with like your best self, right? Like, I don't have any problems, I'm great, right? And so then like you mentioned transportation. So you were probably having difficulties with transportation and you needed some assistance there. And so yes, like I can see how with your first job you didn't mention it, and that but like with other jobs it was safe, right? Like it was more safe that you could do that.
And I often, to add to that, I often like once I got around like my coworkers or I felt the environment, I did let some people in like, hey, I'm in foster care and stuff like that. But I will note that it wasn't received always well. And it made me question tactics. So I went from like, I would say from like my first 10 jobs, I went from oversharing to not sharing at all. Like it was literally in that cycle because I was going off of how people reacted to me being in the state of circumstance that I was in.
Right. So thinking about, so that was like early on, like when you were still in independent living. So thinking about like now, like your last however many jobs, like is now like, and if it's not child welfare, so I know that like you've had some other jobs that weren't child welfare, were there situations there where you like, would you share then about that you had experience in foster care, or do you usually just keep it to yourself now?
Now, I'm empowered by my story. I tell my story from a place of strength, not weakness. And I utilize it, like when you get those questions during interviews, what are something that you would say that makes you stronger, or that is one of the things that I list. Like, hey, I had a very traumatic childhood. I was in foster care, but I believe it's something that's made me stronger because I went through a lot of things that a lot of people that are coming at this age, 18 or 20, stuff like that, coming at those ages as fresh, shielded sometimes, don't have. I have a lot of what I would call street smarts, and just wisdom of how to collect knowledge and communicate in any environment. So I think, now in days, I definitely do share, but I share from a place of strategic sharing, but also positive, because I know as an employer looking at me in an interview or any time we're having a conversation, if I look sad, their reaction is gonna, if I share it, like, oh man, this really happened to me, they're going to react off of what they hear, how my tone is and how my body language is and how it's relayed to them.
Right. So, examples of employers who like, so you talked about when you've shared it, can you share an example of an employer who handled it well when you've shared your story, and then also an example of an employer who didn't?
Okay. I'm gonna start with, the negative, and then we're gonna bounce to the positive. I had an experience where I was working as a car detailer and doing minor mechanical work. Now, I got this job through a connection that worked with us getting vehicles, through YIT funding, which is Youth in Transition funding. And worked the job. I was doing really well. And yet again, life happens. Like, as a person who, at this point, I was in extended foster care in the state of Michigan. I had my own place, but I didn't have my own transportation. I was waiting for I came to work and I had a vehicle in the back lot. I was waiting for the funding to process. So transportation was a little bit sketchy, but when I was there, I was a good worker. My boss came to me and asked me, like, kind of like confronting because of my timeliness, but I did make sure I stayed over, and I explained to her that due to unfortunate events, I ended up in foster care, and now this is my circumstance, and I really rely on my MYOI coordinator's availability, to get me to work. Because at that point, I didn't know if there was any other alternative routes of public transportation. And then there wasn't, even though I found out later, there wasn't any alternative routes that transferred it from one city to the next city, because I was working in another city. And the reaction I got after that was kind of revengeful. Like, now I was vulnerable and I shared that. My boss from that moment didn't outwardly, but was trying to do things to let me go. And eventually what I did, because I wasn't all the way healed, from my trauma, is I walked off. And I never came back, because I'm like, I don't have to, like, I went through trauma, I went through abuse, I went through bullying prior to my adult. I'm not going to take it from anybody in my adulthood. And I don't think it was appropriate to walk off. I think I probably should have talked to someone else, a supervisor or what have you, but it was because of that manager's reaction and behavior towards me. And me not really knowing how to professionally handle situations like that, I reacted in a more self-sabotaging. I knew I needed the money, but the money wasn't, I wasn't recollecting that the money was enough for me to stay and take that. So I left, and that was my bad experience. And I have many others, but I'm gonna use that one. And then really good experience. Due to a lot happening in life, domino effect, getting in a car accident, not being able to work, I ended up being evicted from my apartment at a time. And I ended up staying with friends, and that didn't work out. Became a very toxic situation, and I ended up going to a shelter. And I was staying in that shelter for a little bit of time. Within a couple of weeks, I went to Michigan Works. I believe it's kind of the Michigan of what you guys do. And I got my resume and my cover letter. Coincidentally, I was at a Christian shelter, and the president of my college, my community college at that time, had came with her for sorority, not fraternity, her sorority, and did a little devotional and a little speech of motivation to the people at the shelter. And as she was leaving to greet, everybody, I was like, I don't know what you can do and how you can help me, but here's my resume and here's my cover letter. I need a job and I need to get back in school. The next day, she connected me with the vice president of workforce development, the president of student success, the vice president of student success, and they helped me get a job and they helped me get into school within the matter of weeks, and I was like, I really didn't think enough. I was just like, I was in a desperate state. I needed help, and I knew prior to me losing my place, that I was in a place where I was prideful. I didn't ask for help because of what I mentioned earlier. I felt that, people would look at me differently because they had, or they wanted something, if I did. Plus, another experience was I had thought I had friends, and I asked for help, and it ended up being a scam, and it almost sent me to jail. So like life experiences where I was at a very vulnerable and open state when asking for help to people in the community or whatever, resources, I was gullible to it and I had bad reactions. So I stopped asking. And then when this happened, I was like, everybody isn't bad. So I need to try to be a little bit more smarter, but ask for help. And I did. And the result was I started working 3 jobs. I worked as a clerical assistant, a student life assistant, and the mascot for my college. I worked my way out of the shelter. And it was a really awesome moment, because the shelter wasn't going to give me any more time. And I had built a relationship with this church community, and they were like, we have a room you can rent for $100. I did that, for a little bit of time. And it was a long road still to kind of get into better circumstances. But the lesson that I learned was that it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to really utilize your resources. What I didn't do in the past was surround myself with positive people in a community that actually supported me. So when I got back in school, because I had stopped out in the past, when I got back in school this time, when I got a job this time, I was like, I'm not going to just go to work or just go to school. I need these people to help me. I need something that resembles a family, something that resembles if I'm having an anxiety or panic attack, that I have someone or a resource through the school that I can call. So what I did was surround myself with a village, and that's when I saw me be successful in college. That's when I saw me be successful in employment, and I felt better overall.
Thank you for saying that. So my favorite part of that story is always that you became the school mascot. Like that's hilarious. That's awesome. And what I will also say is the one important thing that I will always brag on Michael about is that not only did he receive support from the school, but he actually created some significant change for Mott Community College once he was there. So Michael reached out to me once he became a student there and said, "Hey, Carrie, they need a campus support program here." And I'm like, "They do? Okay, well, like, who do I talk to?" And Michael actually made some connections, and we all sat down at the table and started a campus-based support program at Mott Community College to support other students who have experienced foster care on campus, because Michael came and brought that energy to the school. So like that's a really huge deal, right? Like, so what I see from that story is like, yes, like you built your community, and it takes a community, right? But then you also like gave back to that community, and the program is still there. So it's one of the 30 campuses across the state that support students. So that's my favorite story that you always say. So we talked a lot about like this, a recurring theme that's come up is like liability mindset, right? Like it's like we understand that the people listening today are employers, and like they have a job to do and a bottom line and all of those things, right? But we want to talk a little bit about what strengths do youth with experience in foster care bring to the workplace? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. As I start with this, I would say like the biggest thing to understand when working with people with lived experience is that if your job isn't like if it's a job, we have to separate the essence of jobs, internship kind of things, and then careers. So the biggest thing to know about individuals who experience care is that we long for stability and security. So if, say for instance, you own a McDonald's is only going to pay me minimum wage. I know that in the long term, that's not security for me. So if I'm not healed, my reaction towards coming to work, being on time, management, doing as best as I can, without a role model or someone mentoring me or someone guiding me, I'm ultimately going to do poorly at that job. And, management may have a couple conversations with me. But if I know that there's, growth, if I know that this is something that's going to help me get to another level, if I know that I have a team that's supporting me at this job, I'm going to do better. But in the long run, the goal is to get towards security and stability for anyone who've experienced, childhood trauma. That doesn't just mean, I'm a person that's been in foster care. That could be someone who experienced being a juvenile as a kid. That can be someone who experienced a really harsh death as a family member. We long for things that keep us grounded, and secure. And when we come to places of employment, if your job is one of those jobs or employment environments is one of those environments that people just come to work and leave, I'm not going to look at that or be happy. It's kind of be like, what do I do then? But I just wanted to share that piece. I lost my train of thought. Please reiterate.
It's the supportive adult piece. It's the supportive adult piece. It's like thinking about how like you need a mentor and you need somebody who's actually willing to like, it's not a transaction, right? Like going to work and like, punching the clock. It's not a transaction. It's more of a transformational relationship. So can you think back and think about like any employers that you've had who were really good mentors and like, what did that look like?
So even though this wasn't really a job per se, I got paid for it, so I can't take it and say. So there's a program in our state called MYOI. So most people know me like, yeah, Michael's done this and that, and that, but like I've done a lot with MYOI in the background statewide. So it did become more like a job for me than others. And my coordinator at the time was really big on me understanding what it means when I stepped in the room. I'm a Black male. I have an afro. I have a beard. I pride myself on, just having like a natural look, and embracing my culture. My coordinator at the time, which was my boss, explained to me, and going for other jobs that, when I step in the room, if I'm dressed well, I can combat stereotypes and stigmas at the door. But if I come in with just a jeans and t-shirt, I buy in to those stereotypes, unfortunately, because that's just how society is. And yes, we have grown better and not, judging books by the cover, but I'm already coming because once they see that, I got my jeans and my t-shirt, and then once I sit down and then I tell them, oh, I've been in foster care, I lost the interview. Because now the stereotypes are there, and then they're like, oh, this person is emotionally unavailable to be able to work here. They may be unstable. What happens if they do, get triggered? Are they going to go off on somebody at the register? And the thing is with that, I look at it as you either have an opportunity to shun someone away and give them a bad memory, or an opportunity to help someone grow and develop professionally. They're not going to get everything right. I don't believe there's any perfect employee, like we all come into an aspect where we need to learn, we need to grow. But if, you specialize or your, company, it has a lot of entry level positions, it's important that you set that up where when people are being interviewed, yes, you want to make sure you have contingency so you're not interviewing someone who isn't fit for the job, but you want to make sure you have a little leeway because there's a lot of stuff that's happened in this world. Even if you take away foster care as a thing, people who went through COVID are reacting different from being in a workplace. I think about the teenagers who just graduated, during COVID, and they, maybe didn't have to work, but now they need to work, their parents, so you need to go, get a job in order to stay here. They have never had a job or had an experience, for about 2.5 years, let alone been in the classroom for that long. So now they're coming back into the world, with maybe some social anxiety, maybe some fear that there may be another COVID outbreak, and yeah, they are going to have some triggers. I think about people who've experienced, there's been a lot of high school and college shootings, a lot of those people aren't going to upfront tell you that these experiences happen, but they, can be looked at as liabilities because of mental health and different things like that. So I believe, as a person who went through this, who have shared my whole story and then shared bits of my stories and seen the different reactions, is that you have an opportunity to help someone grow. You have an opportunity to teach somebody. But the best thing you can do is, because there's more people in this world who've experienced trauma, than not, is to make sure that your company is set up to be able to help individuals grow. And that can be mentally or professionally. Not saying that you have to do all the work, but make sure, if you're going to have a job, that you have resources to connect people to. There's a lot of people that won't say it. They living out of their cars. They're facing homelessness, and that's why they had this interview today. They have bills to pay. They have children. But the best job that I did have was at my school. Working the work studies, because I knew where the resources were. And even if it wasn't a physical person, there was emails being sent to me, saying, hey, just make sure that you're taking care of your self-care. We're going to have somebody come in to do a little short thing while everybody's on their lunch break. It doesn't take away from the clock, but, most people will come and do these things at, jobs for free. Personal wellness and different things like that. So it's important in this day and age, as a person who, I have a company now, so getting ready to employ individuals with lived experience, is that I look at it like, how can I make sure I don't have the capacity to fully wrap around these individuals who's going to work for me, but what can I do to make sure that their experience, whether they are here temporarily or here long term, that I'm providing the resources to help them grow with me and grow forward, and knowledge that, everybody's not going to stay long term. Everybody is going to stay for a week, but what can I provide them from when the day they start to the day they leave, and that can be a simple resource sheet of things that are in the community around you, that can be a simple little sheet that says tips for self-care for working for this type of environment. If you own a couple fast food restaurants, how can you de-stress after working a long stressful line for, however many hours? So
Yeah.
That's my little tidbit.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that, like, it's super important to think about the whole person, and think about, I just think about some of the stories that you shared about, your first job, you're going from one city to the next and you didn't have transportation, and on the employer's end, they're basically just get here on time, what's going on, right? And then they don't know that you're also dealing with all of these other struggles. So what comes up for me is assumptions, right? Don't make assumptions that people have the resources that you do, and that also that people don't have it's the life skills thing, right? Too, thinking about showing up in the jeans or showing up in the dress clothes. That's a really, really important piece of feedback that you would get from somebody. And what I want to know about that is or what I want to call out really is that, so that's not something that your boss or your coordinator told you the first day that they met you, right? This is something that she was invested in the relationship with you, and you'd already developed a supportive relationship, and then she was able to give you that feedback, correct? And then you were able to take it because you trusted her. Oh, you're muted.
There was a rapport built, but I also would say that, I was a big person because I sought out help. When I knew I needed it, I was desperate. So I sought out people that I knew worked in this field. For instance, when I was looking for a job at one point in time, I created a LinkedIn and I sought out actually conveniently the vice president for marketing and communications for one of the places I was in. She became one of my mentors still today. It's one of my mentors. But I reached out to her to help me, with different things. But also another thing with the pants and dressing and stuff like that, no one taught me that. Like there's simple things that like we think that they may be common sense, but really, I grew up. Promise you guys, like from 11 to 18, I was in some type of institution where they controlled the news, they controlled TV. So think about when I went into care, there was flip phones. When I came out of care, there was iPhones, and so 18, even if after I aged out, I was in no aspect of care at 18 to 20. I was dealing with the fact that I was institutionalized.
Mhm.
Yes, I did need work, so I did apply and I worked at some jobs, but professionally was not my best self. I could have used a lot of guidance, from my employers. I could have used a lot of, life skill teaching, on just basic things. Like even if I come to your job in jeans and a t-shirt and some Jordans, maybe that's a teachable moment, and I would say the employers that come to your job dressed like that are, in some aspect of desperation and they're willing to learn, more than likely they're willing to learn. Like that's probably all they got, and they get shut out at the door because they're like, well, this person didn't look like the person that just came in with a suit. This person didn't look like the person who just came in with a polo. But if I'm coming for just a job, more than likely I can't afford it, and that can be the reality. Not assuming that that's everybody. That's why it's important to ask the right questions or what have you and get a sense of the personality and the work ethic of individuals. But I think, we have to try our best to not stereotype and understand cultural competency, in an aspect, but also our environment and our communities that our companies are around. I look in the aspect of, say, for instance, I own a company in Detroit. I know that the poverty rate in Detroit is very high, so I'm not going to assume that everybody's about to come in here with a briefcase, a suit, a portfolio. That would be mistaken on my part. It would be best for me to assume that anyone that's coming in is going to need some training, and they're going to need some help, and they may need some resources that I can provide through other employers that I'm connected with in the network, you know. So what I'm going to do is set myself up for success by thinking already that people are coming into this interview. If I'm doing like an employment fair, okay, they may not have the most professional looking resumes. They may have just typed it up and printed it off coming here, So and it's just things like that to think ahead. What is your community where your job, where your company is? What and and is it, near some transportation? What does that look like? So
Yeah, I was even thinking about like, they probably went, I mean, maybe they don't have a computer. Maybe they had to go to the library to do their resume, and then they don't have a printer and they had to like print it at the library and then, try to figure out how to get transportation to the job fair, like all those things. So, so what I'm hearing is like, it's really about investing in your employees, and like being willing to make that investment. And the most like transformational employment opportunities that you've had or experiences where the employers were willing to like actually get in a relationship with you, or like, actually learn to get to know you, learn to understand like what assets you brought, but then also develop trust with you so they were able to give you that feedback so that you could grow. And that every job offers some sort of growth, right? So so I love all of that. My last question for you before we move on to the last two slides and then open it up for questions and answers is takeaways for employers. So like, what are the greatest takeaways you would want the employers who are listening today to remember about working with young people who have experience or people who have experience in foster care? Oh, mute.
One thing I will, kind of like advise you guys on is just, be open, be receptive. One thing I share anytime I'm doing any kind of speaking event, because I believe it attaches to everything, is be an active listener. Be an active listener. A lot of times, all your answers, all your fears, about hiring somebody or bringing somebody on will be answered by actively listening to someone and not just trying to listen to respond or listen to go to the next question, in an interview. Really get a sense to, like, when you're asking these questions, tell me a little bit about yourself. Really listen to that, but even if you don't get, even if you get someone who isn't that responsive, that gives you like a short piece, develop some questions to pull out more, because that person may have social anxiety. That person may be a little bit of an introvert, and they're looking for a job that's a little bit more friendly to their personality, but a lot of times, and I think about my early stages of doing interviews, I was quiet, I didn't speak out, I'm completely different now, but I didn't speak out. And I know for a fact, I lost a lot of jobs, because of that, and not knowing how to speak properly, not knowing how to speak professionally, oversharing, and different things like that. And these are skills that we like to think, oh, it's common sense, or they have someone to share. But reality is, a lot of people do not have anyone to teach them these basic life skills. And places where they did learn them and supplement, like after school programs or classes through school, have been closed due to funding. So where's the next place that they can get a chance or a break to learn these things? It could be your job. It could be your job. And maybe, like I said, everyone doesn't have the capacity, but maybe what you can do in time, if you do have the capacity for this, is before you hire people, do like some, if you have the capacity, do like some free, networking and bring people in and do some little classes. Do a little hour Zoom to like, hey, anybody in the community who may be looking for a job, here's a little class about what it means to work here, what we're looking for, and some tips on how you prepare yourself to come into an interview for us, or even if you don't have the capacity to do something like a webinar or a video like that, maybe that can be a video that you create that they can click on your website, or on your social media. Like, it's little things that can be helpful. But the last thing I will leave for you guys is that, even if the person doesn't seem to be a good fit coming in, it is important and it's imperative that you give them some kind of feedback to let them know how they can be better. I wish, as a person with lived experience, people gave me that, because I was left open-ended and there was a lot of trial and errors to try to correct, and I'm going back because they pressure you. And when you get into YVAC checks, like, when you gonna get this job or whatever, and I'm like, I'm really applying. Like, there was a moment where I was applying 30 jobs a day, callbacks, all these different things, and I just wasn't getting anything. But no one was giving me feedback to tell me what I was doing wrong. How could I be better? And I think that is really imperative that we get into a place where you don't have to have the greatest report, but you can say, hey, you wasn't a good fit for us at this time, but these were some things that I noticed that if you work on these, maybe you could be a good fit for us later or someone else.
That's brilliant. Thank you. That's amazing. So I'm going to share my screen again. And we're going to talk about we're just going to kind of reiterate some of the things that we've talked about during our conversation. So being a supportive adult. So you don't need to be a social worker. I understand that, like I said, you're an employer and you have a bottom line and you have a job to do. But really being a supportive adult is different. It's the difference between being a boss and a leader, and being open, knowing your role. So we, in the post-secondary world, we call our on-campus support professionals coaches. They need to be coached. They need feedback and skills. They don't necessarily need somebody to save them and solve their problems. So it's really about doing with a young person or helping them learn rather than doing for. Knowing your resources. So you folks in business are often the most connected in the community. So if you know somebody that's coming to your job site is homeless and living in their car, like, who do you know that might be able to help with housing, food, transportation, those types of things? I also provided a resource sheet too that might be helpful to learn a little bit more about this population, and also has some resources that may help you to be able to connect your employers to different resources in your community. Create an environment of learning in the workplace. So like really thinking about assets. What kind of skills does this young person need to develop to be successful in their work and career? Even if it's like their first job, right? Like even if it is a McDonald's or even if it is a retail place, like what kind of skills can you help a young person develop so that they can move forward and think about growth in career? Because like when you're just aging out of foster care, you're not thinking about growth in career, right? You're thinking about like how to survive, how to pay bills, and how to navigate the mess that, you know, you're trying to live. So there's all that. I'll also say talking to them about their future. So like thinking about equating those day-to-day job skills with what they might want to do later and become passionate about. So, and like, I think that's normal for all of us. Like when we first start working, we really just want to make money, right? We want to make money and try to figure out how to live independently. And it's only later when we start to think, oh, okay, actually, like I want a career. I want something that's fulfilling. And so talking about that with them, you might be the only person who's ever asked them about, what are you dreaming about doing? What do you want your life to look like? I think it's really important, and Michael and I didn't touch on this super a lot. So I can leave some space to talk about this right now, but looking beyond like any sort of like school records or criminal records and like seeing a young person for like who they are. So I know, Michael, I'll leave a little bit of space if you want to talk about this or share. But we talked about when you and I did the run through about like that, like the youth with experience in foster care are often involved with the juvenile justice system too. So they might have a record, but that doesn't necessarily mean that like that record shouldn't reflect. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I've shared my story, so hopefully this isn't triggering to anyone. At 14 years old, I was threatened by a family member, and I picked up a knife to protect myself. And I got charged with felonious assault, and went through a program as like the state acts and all these different things, and it was supposed to disappear, you know, and what have you. So I did everything that I needed to do to be a better law-abiding citizen, you know, a better kid at that time, really. And later on in my life, I learned that, when I get fingerprinted, it shows up. But when I do paper background checks, it doesn't. So one point I had to explain to an employer that I was 14. I was 14 in a very abusive, toxic, dysfunctional environment and family. And unfortunately, but fortunately, that incident saved my life, because it put me in the system, and foster care, although it wasn't the greatest experience, it saved me. But I honestly feared for my life And unfortunately, because I had a prior juvenile record, the police came towards me instead of questioning my family member at that time. But um, it happens. It happens a lot, and that's a clerical error that, it was supposed to be sealed or expunged, at 18 or what have you. And my county dropped the ball. And I know that there's many people that, maybe it wasn't expunged, maybe it was something, that still show up or what have you. But a lot of these individuals are looking for a chance and an opportunity to prove and to show that they are better than their worst moment,
Mhm.
and I feel like that's everybody in the world, and unfortunately and we talked about being in that survival state. A lot of the individuals who are in foster care that have juvenile side, a lot of them were surviving. A lot of them didn't have anything else. So, any kind of guidance or any kind of other things, so you're going to see with working with people with lived experience, a lot of maybe assault or fighting, different things like fighting in high school, um, I don't know if it shows up like this, but truancy or AWOL, different things and stuff like that. And maybe a lot of tickets, I'll be honest, like in different things like that. But, I think as we spoke about before, there's an opportunity to coach and to guide that person. There has more times out of not, working with young people, they have not had anybody to give them a chance or a break at life, and they always have been looked at as their circumstance. Even though, we have this whole great system, that, nurtures us when our parents drop the ball. The system has a part to play in it too. And, providing those labels for us. So we're always looked at as the foster youth or the criminal or the delinquent or and it's really hard when you try to get into the real world. In a case like myself, I didn't know it was still on my record. So I went for a little summer job as a janitorial at a school, and they said, unfortunately, we can't hire you. And they said for some reason they couldn't provide rides, so I had to actually call the company to see who did my records to get the information myself. And I saw that it was on there, and I'm like, it's crazy because at this point in my life, I had lived. I had worked as a CNA, worked in hospital, all these different fields, and I'm like, I worked with children. I'm like, this is really wild, so like hit or miss, and I'm like, this is something that I need to take care of because I don't know how this will reflect, but also I reached out to an employer to help me because I didn't know who to go to, and they referred me to a legal aid center to get a lawyer to help me through it because my county wanted me to pay for it, which was going to be a longer process. And I'm like, well, it's a clerical issue on your side, but these are just things that a lot of people experience, but more often than not, people in the foster care side of things tend to have, a juvenile record, or maybe even an adult criminal record, for those 18, 19, 20. I say those years are really rocky because they're just getting out into a society where they get to choose how to live. And it's really hard when you have never had sugar. You've never had sugar and someone gives you some sugar, you either gonna really like it and you're gonna want more, or you really gonna not like it and be like, oh, it's too sweet, But, in that moment that you really like it and you want more, it can be addictive. It can be addictive. And a lot of people are addicted to, making bad decisions, and unfortunately, because they don't know in that moment that these are bad decisions, they do a lot of falling and stumbling, but you have an opportunity as an employer to help someone transform their life. And then what they're going to do, because more times they're going to become an individual like me, someone helped me, I went back and helped somebody else, and it pays it forward.
I'll say too, that brings up for me that whole failing safely thing, right? So like, yeah, when you're 18, 19, 20, you make really stupid decisions. Like I moved to Florida to live in Panama City. Like how dumb. I quit school, but like the difference is that I had like that family privilege. It was okay. Like my parents were like, they helped me. And when I wanted to move back to Michigan, go back to school, like it was not a big deal. Like I was able to do that and they encouraged me to do that. But when you think about a young person who has experienced foster care, like everybody's going to be stumbling, but it's about the resources that you have once you have stumbled. So those are really big deals. So thanks for sharing that, Michael. I really appreciate that. Being a leader and a role model is really important. So actually showing young people how to interact appropriately with supervisors and coworkers. So instead of like getting your feathers ruffled and getting irritated if like somebody's getting lippy, you know, maybe like everybody calm down and then talk about like actually how it's appropriate to have some sort of disagreement with a supervisor. That might be something that a young person's never had before. And then don't make assumptions. So ask questions about the support they may need. Because a lot of times, as Michael said multiple times, like it's hard to ask for help. It's hard for me to ask for help. So I think that those are really important things. I have another slide. Okay, and so then also reorient your narrative. So how are your assumptions or frustrations impacting your interactions? And then thinking about an assets, like what's working right with this employee. So just like even this hour that we spent with Michael, like as employers, I bet you could like name off 5 to 10 different assets that Michael brings, right? Like I can. He's dynamic, he's resilient, he's smart. He has a great laugh. You feel comfortable talking with him. Like these are all strengths. A tenacity for sure. So like naming those strengths for your young people, telling them what you see and encouraging that growth. And then thinking about how you can empower them to work more effectively and creatively. And then thinking as a culture, how you can help your organization invest in employees so that you can meet your goals, but then also support your employees in an effective way. Just to reiterate the coaching idea, they need an adult that will have their back. They need to be able to fail safely because everyone fails sometimes. They need a coach who's going to challenge them to think about their future, but also one who understands that there are like a whole bunch of things that you might not know about that are obstacles that are standing in their way. And they need patience, guidance, understanding, and authenticity. So they need to know that you're not perfect. Like that's kind of a big deal. And that they need someone who will actually care about them and not just the bottom line. So like that's the big idea that I want to leave you with. I see that there's some questions and there's chats. Okay, Kirsten dropped in some resources into the chat. I made a page of different resources. Some of them will talk about help you get to know the population a little bit better, but then there's also some local resources that will help you to connect in your community with things that may help. Okay, question. Are juvenile records off limits for employers unless they are mandated to conduct a background check? I don't know the answer to that. Do you know the answer to that, Michael?
Yeah, so let me look at this question. So more times, like if it's a case like mine's, like which we are seeing a lot, because court systems are backed up, a lot of things happen. We had the whole thing with COVID, cases are still being seen from that time, So a lot of times, there are things that are left unsealed. In a case like my own, it doesn't really specify the age when this incident happened. So as an employer, you see that, you think this happened recently, or happened, but then it doesn't specify that this was a juvenile or what have you, in a lot of cases. So that's where it's really important. If something like that does happen or what have you, you ask questions about it, especially if this person really excelled in the interview and then you saw this in the background, you're like, I want to ask them, that could be a follow-up phone call. Like, hey, something came up on your background. If you could provide a little bit more clarification, on when this has happened, or whatever. And you want to make sure as an employer, you create what are your limitations and boundaries or what you are willing to accept. So that upfront, these individuals know, like, okay, if I have this type of, I can't work here, and that doesn't, and that doesn't make anyone feel better or what have you. That actually helps and provide for a person like myself. Like, okay, that helps me know, like, this isn't in place, so I need to figure out where are areas that I can work that, are okay. So I think that's really best. Hopefully I answered your question. But even having, a lot of people don't know. Like me, I didn't know until one employer, so it may be helpful if you do have like a resource sheet or what have you, and you do end up hiring some people on, that you have something on that resource sheet that helps people figure out expungement, because a lot of times there's expungement resources and different things that are happening nationwide, and they can get it done for free, so they can be relieved, or whatever reason, but it does happen, and it doesn't really specify. Like, when it showed up, it didn't specify that I was 14. So now I'm explaining to the job, but they had strict rules because of the school. I'm explaining to the school that it's like, I was 14, I'm grown, or what have you. But because it was a school, I didn't get hired for that job. I believe prior to, if I knew and I wrote that, hey, this may potentially show up and I can provide proof that I was 14 at this time in, state care or what have you. I think that would have gave me a better chance. But I think for that particular employer, it was a lack of being honest, about something that I did not know, and I think the honesty plays a big part when people make their decisions about who they want to bring in. But there is a potential that the person does not know.
And I'll say too, there's a comment in the chat that I'll read in just a second, but I'll say too, so as a social worker, like, I'm just really aware of like how systems operate, and systems operate in a way to basically like support the system, not necessarily to serve people. And so it's a mess. So there's always oversights, there's always mistakes, there's always, like, you have to figure out, if you're involved with the system, how to advocate for yourself within the system and navigate the system in a way that it works. And a lot of times we see young people who are successful because they've actually learned how to navigate the system. And the ones that aren't, like, it's because the system didn't work for them in any way. So I'll say that only certain employers are mandated to conduct fingerprint background checks: schools, hospitals, daycares, nursing homes, financial institutions, government entities. But Michael, you were saying that you had worked as a CNA and had no problem, and then tried to.
So that wasn't like, I believe that wasn't even fingerprints. So like, it really, like, I believe it depends on the state. It depends on the county. Like, there's a lot of different variations. So I think like checking in what your particular protocol with that is. But like I said, like, it was hit or miss. So like, sometimes it showed up, sometimes it didn't. And that was the biggest confusion with myself, so the better process for me would have gone through the whole court process and just eliminate it altogether, because I didn't know if I did my fingerprints this time, if it would show up or if it wouldn't, and because of it wasn't really specified when, or if it was a juvenile or this or that, I found myself explaining myself a lot, and getting turned down a lot. But like I said, I worked as a CNA. I've been a paramedic before, I've worked in juvenile detention centers, so I'm like,
right.
And then the one job, it was a janitorial job. It was a summer janitorial. That's the one job I did not, at a school. I'm like, come on, what?
Right, right.
But I don't know. Like, it was really hit or miss, and I just decided to just try to get it fixed at that point. So
Thank you. So we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I just want to open it up for any other questions. You can feel free to add them in the Q&A box. You can raise your hand. I understand Kirsten can unmute you if you'd like to do that. But we are happy to answer any additional questions that you may have, or give us feedback about whether this was helpful.
So Carrie and Michael, thank you both so much for presenting today. I know that it was some great information, and I just kind of wanted to hop on just to give a little kind of round out the connection for everybody. So our center, ICSPS, works both with the workforce system as well as the education side. So career and technical education, adult education, which is really more of my wheelhouse. And so our job as a center is really to try to assist and help smooth that transition for individuals as best as we can. So starting from secondary into post-secondary into the workforce system. And so when you're talking about the education side specifically, career and technical education is under Perkins 5. That's the federal law that kind of regulates career and technical education. And within Perkins 5, they have what are called special populations. And so these are individuals who just need some additional supports and assistance. And I believe for the workforce side, it's very similar to targeted populations, which individuals with experience in foster care falls within that special population. And so that's kind of where this all really started and developed, and how we came across Carrie and Michael and the wonderful information that they are sharing today. So just wanted to bring that into a little bit of perspective there in case you hopped on and you're like, okay, this is great information, but where's that connection really? And so we're
Thank you so much, Brittany.
Yeah, seeing a lot of this was very helpful. Thank you for sharing. Great presentation.
It was great to be here, and we really appreciate you listening. Like I said, this is not like, this is new content, but it's really important content. If this conversation is more robust between employers and employees, then I think that both would be benefiting. So thank you for your time today. I'll turn it back over to Kirsten and Brittany.
Great. Thank you so much, Carrie, for presenting today. And I just wanted to put a quick plug in for our upcoming Workforce Wednesday webinars series and sessions. We are promoting the Returning Citizens Work Group series of webinars and live presentations that are coming up. So make sure you're checking our website for that. And then I also put the survey in the chat. I know, when I watch a webinar, I want to take the survey right away. So we would love to hear your feedback on this session or any future ideas for Workforce Wednesday webinars. Please feel free to take that survey. It's in the chat. It'll also be in the follow-up email tomorrow too, if that's easier for you. And just again, you will get a follow-up email with the recording link and everything in it as well. And if there's any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Brittany. We'd be happy to put you in contact with Carrie and her team, or ask them questions as well. I'm going to go ahead and close us out if nobody has anything else. And Carrie, did you want to say any last remarks?
Nope. Thank you so much for having us, and feel free to reach out if we can provide any more information.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.